I assume that you see my presentation. So here's the plan for what we are going to do in the next 90 minutes. I guess you heard a lot that this kind of that you have to join a theoretical conversation, that you have to make a contribution, a theoretical contribution. So we hear it a lot, we say it a lot, but what does it actually mean concretely? And what I will try to do here is to offer you some concrete steps that you can hopefully adapt to try to make sure that you are making a theoretical contribution and you are joining a theoretical conversation. To do that, I will say a little bit about what I mean by theory and why we prioritize theory so much. And we make if you want to publish in like the good kind of high-ranked kind of journals, you have to make a theoretical contribution. Then I'll speak a little bit about how we position ourselves in this theoretical conversation. And I'll offer you three tools how to read other people's work in order to be able to use it to position yourself and make a contribution. I'll give one example from my own work, and then I'll open it for questions and comments, and hopefully we will have a discussion. I'm also very open for you to pose a question at any time along the conversation, so it doesn't have to be a monologue now for 45 minutes. If you have a specific question, please just unmute yourself and ask me, and I'll be happy to stop and relate to that. So the first issue is what is theory really and why we prioritize it. And let me start with an example, like my own story. So this is my first paper that I ever published. It was published in 2002 in Academy of Management Journal. I was very, very proud when it was published. And so I called my mother and I said, Mom, I just published my first paper. And she was also very, very happy. And apparently she called all my siblings and told them that I just published a paper, because they started calling me, and I have 5 siblings. So all of them started calling me and saying, congratulations, how wonderful, you got your first paper published. None of them actually asked me what the paper was about. They just congratulated me for the paper, apart from my older brother. So my older brother was really interested, and he said, please send me the paper. I really want to read it and see what my baby sister is writing about. So I sent him the paper, and 15 minutes later, he calls me and he was pissed off. And he said, and he's an attorney by training. So he said, I couldn't get it past the first page of your paper. I did understand each of the words in itself, but I couldn't understand what you're talking about, because it's so full of theoretical jargon. So, and he said, I would never ask you to read any of your papers again, because it's inaccessible. So I wondered why, was it really inaccessible? So I went back to the paper and I marked in yellow all the theoretical concepts. So these are not these words that have specific definitions, theoretical definition. And this is how it looks like. So he was actually really right about it. And you know that our theoretical language may be inaccessible to other people who are not in the know within this specific kind of conversation. And you probably also know that we as academics, as scholars, we get a lot of criticism about that we speak in our own language and we don't make enough of effort for other people to understand. So it really brings to the fore the question, so why theory? Why do we, in this scholarly kind of work that we are doing, why do we stick with theory so much? Why is it really that important that we will speak in this specific language that other people cannot understand? And I think let's go back to what theory is and say a few words about that, because my whole discussion here would be based on the assumption that theory is really very important. And this is why you need to be sure that you are making, you are joining a theoretical conversation and you are making a theoretical contribution. So from the Oxford Dictionary, theory is a supposition or a system of ideas that are intended to explain something. That something would be the empirical kind of reality outside there, that we are going and collecting data and stuff like that. Especially the explanation is based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained. So we really try to start for something empirical that we see in the world, but then to be able to explain it in a language more abstract that is really independent of that which we are seeing. we do that through the process of theorizing or conceptualizing. And of course, there are many ways to go about it. So this is really kind of an umbrella kind of concept, but some aspect that are shared in different kind of understanding of what conceptualization or theorization is that we do that as researchers, right? We try to make some kind of informed knowledge claims, right? To claim something about the world that is informed through this process of collecting the data and then analyzing it. And what we're trying to bring up is some kind of a general structure or pattern or general characters of something that we saw in the world, right? So we're looking to really identify the patterns really in the world. And we do that through naming or framing, categorizing different things into different categories that we come up with, or relating between different concepts, or of course by abstracting. So there are different ways to go about it. And Joop Cornelissen, who was the first author in this paper, has a series of papers. If you're interested in conceptualizing and different ways to go about it, it's a very good place to start with his work, with his very, very smart, very wise ideas about different kinds of conceptualizations. So what I'm actually saying here, and this is the way I understand theory or conceptualization, is really theory serves as a bridge. We go to the outside world. Each of us have their own kind of cases that we study, but theory gives us the language, the vocabulary to speak beyond these different cases. So we have our different cases, but then theory allows us to speak across all these different kind of cases, the empirical cases, right? So in that sense, theory allows us to accumulate knowledge, because I have the knowledge that comes from my case, and then you have a knowledge that comes from your case, and then we can actually communicate on the theoretical level beyond the particularities of each of these cases. Put differently, theory is the way that we can convince other people that what is interesting for me in my case is supposed to interest them relevant to their case, right? Because each of us, we choose cases oftentimes because it's really interesting for us. We have some kind of personal interest in whatever the case is about. But the real question is, why should other people care about that? I know why I care about each of the cases that I'm studying. I do have some personal interest in them. But why should you care about my cases? And the other way around, why should I care about your particular case? So let me just give you an example. My Ph.D. was about a rape crisis center in Israel. If you're not interested in rape crisis centers, if you're not interested in rape crisis centers in Israel, why should you read my paper? Why should you care about my case? Later on, my studies were around the Israeli high-tech. If you're not interested in high-tech, like the high-tech industry, if you're not interested in high-tech industry, or you're not interested in the high-tech industry in Israel, why should you read my papers? And nowadays, my most newest kind of study is about organizing at the end of life. So how are people allowed to die? And where, when, who's taking the decisions at the end of life? I'm very interested in that. I have my personal reasons why, but why should you care about that? The only way to answer about this question, why should other people care about what we are studying, is to move to the theoretical level. Because I studied a rape crisis center in Israel, but theoretically, my argument was around the interplay between meanings and actions in institutional dynamics. So on that theoretical level, what I had to say about this rape crisis center may be relevant to any organization, and may be relevant to the organizations that you are studying. So when I move to the theoretical level and more abstract level, suddenly I have a much larger potential kind of audience who may find this work relevant to their cases, right? I studied the conferences in Israeli high tech. So I actually went and collected data in conferences, like industry-wide conferences. Maybe if you're doing work about conferences, you would be interested as well. But abstracting from there, what I try to say is something about industry level kind of dynamics. So if you are studying any kind of industry in any place around the world, maybe what I have to say is relevant to you and to your case. And it's only so because I'm moving from the empirical kind of level to a more theoretical level. And of course, hopefully, eventually, when I will have something to say about from my current studies about end of life, I will be able to theorize from this case to more abstract questions about the body, about emotions, about relations, institutional dynamics, and maybe in that sense, it will be relevant to other contexts as well. So theory is really a bridge. We create this theoretical conversation using this vocabulary to talk across different cases, because this is how science works, right? Each of us is working on our own case, but then to accumulate knowledge, we have to move from the case level to a more theoretical, conceptual level. And then what we are saying may be relevant to other cases as well. And this is how we develop this theoretical conversation between us. So although some people may be very pissed off that we are speaking in this language that other people cannot understand, for us, this language is really very important because it allows us this conversation. And just think about it. When you meet someone who really works within your theory, and you don't have to explain anything. You don't have to define your construct. You don't have to explain the entire, you just speak in your language and someone else understands it. It's so wonderful that the communication is so much better and so much swifter and smoother that way. This is the way theory helps us. So we develop this understanding of the world through conceptualization, through a specific kind of language, theoretical language. And then we can speak with each other and we can accumulate knowledge further. And then you can listen to my talk about my Rape Crisis Center, study and understand how this study is relevant to my conceptualization may be relevant to your case. So whenever you start writing, you always have to ask yourself, not how what you are writing explain your case, but what other people can do with that. And for other people to be able to use your insights, you have to move from the case level to a more theoretical level. And that way you are also extending your audience. Now, of course, there are many different theoretical conversations going on, like within organization theory, within organizational behavior. So we have to make some choices. We can't speak to everyone. But you want to identify some theoretical conversation that is relevant to your case, and then work within this theoretical conversation. So theory is central, but it also, as we know, it's very, very challenging. How do I do that? How do I join this kind of, okay, I identify the conversation that seems to be relevant to my case, that I want to be part of this conversation. How do I do that? That is really, really challenging. And I can share with you some stuff that I know from my role now as a co-editor-in-chief of organization studies, which is one of the largest, like the most central kind of organization theory journals in Europe. And when we get papers, we see all kinds of recurring kind of problems with the papers that will get them rejected. One of them may be that they just don't fit our journal, because our journal, like any journal, we have a specific kind of aim and scope. And if you send a paper that is simply out of fit, then probably it will get rejected. Second kind of problem that we see is that there is some serious problem with your manuscript. So something is not working there. Maybe it's way too short or way too long, and maybe it's very unclear, or the focus is not clear what you're trying to say, or there is some kind of incoherence between different parts of the paper. Okay. But I think the interesting category for us here is the third category, where we read your paper. It's okay. It fits wonderfully with our journal, and it's good. Like, I mean, in terms of coherence and in terms of the different parts and the focus and everything, it's good. But what we don't see is a serious enough theoretical contribution. So we don't understand what is the theoretical conversation that you are trying to join, or we don't understand why you're using this theory, or we don't understand what is already known and why, in what way you are contributing to this conversation, what exactly you are adding to it. So this is really the challenge here. We want to join a theoretical contribution, a theoretical conversation. We want to make a theoretical contribution. We know we have to do it, but how to do it? It's not that easy to anyone. I mean, even people with experience, each time you write a paper, it's a new challenge. How do I do that? So let me first, before I offer 3 steps that you can take hopefully will help you to join a theoretical contribution. Let me first tackle this question. So when exactly in the research process are you supposed to start thinking about making this theoretical contribution, right? And it may be in any stage. If you're thinking about the research process as a kind of a spiral, right? So we are going, hopefully we're going up and up and, progressing in the way we are thinking about what we are doing. So, you have a case study, maybe your research started from a case, maybe your research started from a question, then you collect any kinds of data, field materials, right? You have to analyze, you have to start thinking about theory, you have to make a theoretical contribution, but when exactly? So it may be in any part, any stage of this process. Oftentimes, we just have to write a research proposal, so you have to start thinking about it very, very early before you collect the data. Maybe later on, you will change it a little bit. So this is kind of a dynamic kind of process that in every serious junction in the process of doing the research, moving from beginning in that kind of a spiral way till the end, you may have to stop and ask yourself again, what is my theoretical conversation? What exactly am I doing? How do I join it? Especially people that are doing, like me, qualitative research. In qualitative research, you start from a specific kind of broad question, right? And then maybe once you start collecting the field materials, maybe the question will change because something in the data will speak to you and will show you that you didn't ask the right question. So certainly in qualitative research, I may have to change my theoretical focus throughout the way. So whenever you have to do that, whether you're doing it at the beginning and stays with it to the end, or maybe you start beginning in one theoretical conversation and then you move to another, how do we do that? How do we join a theoretical conversation? So I want to suggest these three ways of reading, very concrete, that will help you understand what's going on in the theoretical conversation and how you can join it. So assuming that you have a very general idea of which conversation you are joining, you would first identify the relevant work that you need to read. And I'll say a few words about that. How do we identify what we need to know in order to understand the theoretical conversation? And then I will offer three ways of reading. One of them I call vertical, which means I'm trying to understand the paper in itself. The second one is horizontal, where I try to understand the paper within the conversation. And only the last one is the one that we are really looking for, but it takes the two prior reads to get there. Only on the third kind of reading, I'm asking myself, how is that paper relevant to me? How can I use it in my argument? So first identifying, and then three kinds of reading. So all in all, I'm offering here 4 steps to think about how you join a theoretical conversation and position yourself within this conversation. So first of all, you have to understand what you need to read, what you need to know about this theoretical conversation. There's no way that you can position yourself within the conversation if you don't understand the conversation, right? So first I need to find it, and the way at least I'm working with Web of Science. I think it's a great tool here covering the entire social sciences, and they have, to my understanding, better kind of functions than Google Scholar, for example, in order to do all these kind of searches that I want to do. So I'm doing this kind of basic search. I'll put in my keyword, like I'm working within institutional theories, or maybe I'll write institutions, and then I'll just see what's come up, like within this kind of a general kind of. So for example, this from a paper about institutional logics, doesn't really matter whether you know what institutional logics are or not. This is a concept within institutional theory. I want to join this conversation around institutional logics. So now I want to understand what is already known in this conversation. So I want to see all the papers already published that use this concept. This is a very large conversation. It may be thousands of papers, so maybe I will not read all of them, not all of them. So maybe I will use another kind of limiting kind of term to make sure that the conversation is, because you have like 1,200 papers around institutional logics. I think it was back like a year ago, so probably by now they're a little bit more. Maybe I'll read all of these. Maybe I'll do some, kind of combine this search with kind of outlets. For example, I would, just limit myself to journals within our discipline. You can do that or whatever. But I may even spend like a week or two just going over all these 1,200 papers. This doesn't mean that I actually read all of them, because what I'll do is I'll start from the titles and I'll try to figure out whether I actually need to read them or not. So how relevant they seem to be from the title to what I'm studying. And maybe if the title is not clear enough, then I'll read the abstracts. And then by this, I will decide whether this paper is something that I need to read or not. I look, on the level of the analysis. Maybe I'm doing research about organizational level, and some of the papers are on industry level. So maybe these papers I will not read, and stuff like that. I try to figure out analytically what I need to read and what I don't have to read. So at the end of this step, may take me a week or two to go over all these papers, I know which one I actually have to read. So that's the first step, identifying what you need to read. And of course, I'm also using, like when I identify a paper that certainly I need to read, then I can use its reference list to see whether what are the other papers, or maybe I can check who cited this paper. If this paper is really important to me, then I can then check who cited this paper, and then I can go and check out of these papers which one I have to read. So this is kind of like it takes some time to build this like in the library. Here are the papers that I actually have to read to understand this conversation that I want to join. So this is I identify them, right? And I'm looking for content. So what I did now is like topic kind of research, just by topic, by the keywords, institutional logics. Maybe I want also to identify the most influential kind of articles out there. So I'll look at on citations, like which are the articles most cited, which means that are used most often within this conversation, and I'll make sure that I'm reading these ones. Maybe I want to read by outlet, because I know where I'm planning to try to publish my paper. So I want to make sure that I know everything in that area in that journal. Maybe I want to look at the classics. So I'll go for the oldest papers. Maybe I want to make sure that I know what's going on right now. So I look at the most recent papers. So there are different ways for me to structure this kind of search to make sure that eventually I identify the entire kind of set of papers that I need to know if I really seriously want to join this conversation. So at the end of this stage, the first stage, I have the list of papers that I need to read. And now we can move to 3 ways of reading them, because I know one of the errors that I do is that I really want to save some time, and I really want to understand very quickly how can I use this paper. But usually when I do that, it doesn't work, because I don't really understand the paper. And if you don't understand the paper, you cannot really use it in a very kind of wise way. So what I'm trying to encourage you to do is not to try to cut corners, but like the long way is the shortest way, really, the best way here. So my first reading, I'm saying to myself, Tammar, take it easy. I'm now just read this paper to understand this paper. Really understand what these authors try to do in this paper. Just leave everything out. Just focus on that. And I use tables just because otherwise it's all kind of blurring in my head. So I'm recording the full reference, because later on I would like to use it. So I need to know which paper is that. And then I try to answer these questions that you can see here in my columns. So what is the theory that they are using? How do they phrase their research question? If they use different kinds of concepts, how do they define these concepts? Because oftentimes, even within the same theoretical conversation, the same concepts may be defined differently. And I want to know that, because eventually I would like to make a choice for myself which definition I'm using. So I want to understand the entire set of definitions out there. So these are the 2 main questions that I ask. Then I ask myself, what is the case that they're using and what is the method? Because sometimes I will try to position myself not only theoretically, but also methodologically. Like to say, most studies use interviews and I'm using observations, and this allows me to make a theoretical contribution that others couldn't do because they didn't have the kind of data. So I want to make sure that I know what was the case and what was the method, because I may use it later on to position myself. And then I want to understand what did they find? What are the findings? And what is their claimed contribution? So what are they claiming is their contribution? And by the time I've managed to answer all these questions, and usually what I do is cut and paste parts of the paper into my table, now I understand the paper. So this is vertical kind of reading, because I'm reading very deeply, trying to understand what they did in this paper. Okay, so this really like reading, right? It may take a few hours to read and understand what this paper is about. Any questions, comments about the vertical reading before I'm moving to the next reading?
I have
Yeah, please, Faisal.
I have a question regarding trailblazers. From the last slide, you told me how to identify the paper for read, and it
Yes.
is mentioned trailblazers. What are they?
Okay, these are the classic, those who started the conversation. So these are the papers that are so classic that everyone in this conversation would reference to them. So trailblazers are really the people who created the trail, this theoretical trail, this theoretical conversation.
All right, got
Okay.
it. It means the pioneers who started working on that topic, on a specific topic.
The people who put forth the early conceptualizations in this theoretical conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Tammar, I just had a quick question.
Please.
When you said case and methods, what does case mean?
Okay, so for me, like I'm doing qualitative research, that would be like what is the organization or the industry that they are studying? Or what is, sorry?
Got it. That makes sense. The context, sort of the second question I had was when we're identifying sort of the whole set of papers that are relevant to us, just sort of like a rule of thumb, just so I understand like the breadth of that. Usually, what would be the number of papers that would you say?
Okay, well, this depends on how rich the conversation is, right? Some, like in my area of studies, I'm working within institutional theory. This is a very big tent, so it may be 1,200 papers that I have to read. But maybe your conversation is smaller. I'm doing all this check. This is why I put it on these slides. If you look at the right keyword, if you're looking at papers that are well cited in good outlets, but also current papers, then I think overall, and then you also see who is referencing what. Like if you found a paper that really is relevant to you, then look at how other people used it, and look also who they are citing. So eventually you will have the conversation. It's kind of hard to say how many because it depends on the conversation.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you so much.
Sure.
How do you qualify? How do you capture this information? Do you use special software, EndNote, Access, Excel sheets? What do you use?
Well, I'm old school, so I'm just using these tables in doc files just because Excel is too much for me. Use whatever is working for you. Like, I mean, you use Zotero, use EndNote, whatever is working for you to get it in there. Okay.
I think in vivo also has capacity for literature reviews and
whatever is working for you is great. Like whatever is helping you. Let me just emphasize here. Each of the columns here relates to an issue that may help me later on, because I want to understand what theory and definitions they're using, because maybe later on I will follow them, or maybe I will contradict them or something. I want to understand the case of the method, because again, sometimes our positioning relates also to the method, because different methods allow different kinds of conceptualizations. So I wanted to record it because I will not remember it later because I'm reading so many papers, right? So this is why each of these columns, it's not arbitrary. It's really kind of the data that I want, because I don't want to be in a situation when I have to go back and try to remember which paper spoke about something that now I want to use. I want to have it all in my tables to be able later on to use it more quickly, right? So this is why I'm really working seriously on these tables. So this is the first reading. Now I understand the paper. Then I can move to the second reading, which sometimes is really a second time. Like after I read all these papers and really understood them, then I go over them again. This will be much quicker now, but this is the horizontal kind of reading, where what I really want to understand, I already understand the paper. What I want to understand is how this paper relates to other papers in this conversation. So what I really try to understand is the entire conversation, like the macro level kind of what's going on in this conversation, like in terms of the development of the conversation a long time and the different strands kind of this conversation. Because later I would like to position myself there, and I can say, you know, how I'm positioned, I have to understand the entire conversation. So what I'm adding now, I already covered some of these columns. What I'm adding now is what is the position of this specific paper in the theoretical conversation, not my paper, this paper that I'm now reading. Of course, I cannot do it at the beginning because I only start to get to know the conversation. So you can only do that once you understand the conversation, which actually usually means after you went through all the papers, now you go back and you try to understand how this paper relates to other papers, to the entire conversation. And there are different ways it can be. Maybe I try to understand how this conversation changed over time. Maybe this is a conversation that really has some different kind of stages. And I can say early on, this is what they did with this conversation. Later, they came up with a new idea. And now we have this really new kind of stuff going on. And I'm part of this trend of the really very new stuff that's going on. Or I can say early on, they were interested in X. Then they all moved to be interested in Y, but we actually don't understand X good enough. So this is why my work is so important, because I'm going back to X. And I'll show you how my study allows us to see something that was bypassed historically in this conversation. So it may be trends over time, it may be some kind of a gap. So we see all these different issues that this conversation kind of covered, but there's one issue that they didn't cover or is not well understood. Maybe there is some kind of puzzle. Some of the works, some of the papers that I read claim A and some of the paper claim B, and there's no way still to understand why sometimes it's A and sometimes it's B. And my study will be able to solve this puzzle and show you when we see this kind of findings and when we see this kind of effect. So it's kind of different, or maybe there are different threads in this conversation, like different kind of subgroups within this conversation, each of them focusing on different issue. And now that I understand that, I can position myself in one of these subgroups. So I really try to understand the conversation itself as a dynamic and emerging kind of phenomenon, right? I mean, different people are publishing, and eventually we have this theoretical conversation. And I want to understand this conversation in order to be able to position myself within this conversation. So this is the horizontal kind of, I go back to each of the papers, trying to figure out how it relates to all the other papers that I just read, and then trying to figure out different categories or different temporal dynamics or whatever. Any questions about that? Because then if we understand that, then we can move finally to the third kind of reading, which is really the most pressing reading for us. And this is the question, how can that be relevant to me? How can I use this paper for my argument? Not just to, review the literature, but how can I use it for my argument? So now I'm adding this one more column, and I just put there a few examples of how I can use, or you can use this specific paper for your argument. So for example, I may use it on a theoretical level. So it's relevant to me on a theoretical level because I'm saying something similar or different to what they have been saying theoretically. It may be relevant methodologically because I'm doing what many other papers already done. So this is a way for me to create my authority and legitimacy. I'm doing this because so many people before me did it. So it's, it's a common practice. It's like maybe a best practice within the field. Or maybe I'm doing something that no one did. Maybe I'm bringing in some methodology from another conversation. But this is really good because this will allow me to collect different kinds of data and do different kinds of analysis and come up with different kinds of insights, right? So it may be similar or it may be different. And it's, either way, I have to justify why this is good. This is an advantage of my study. And then maybe I'm connecting on the empirical level. Maybe most of the studies in this area were about for-profit organizations, but my study is about non-for-profit organization. And this, again, allows me to see something that we haven't seen before, right? So it may be similar or different on a theoretical level, it may be similar or different on a methodological level, it may be similar or different on an empirical level. Each way I can use to position myself and to justify the kind of choices that I've made. Okay, and then in terms of how I position myself, I may be similar to others, I may be different to others, I may be following in the footsteps of someone who already said that, and I'm just pushing it a little bit further. I may be complementing, like we already know all this, but I'm complementing a piece of the puzzle that we still don't know, or maybe I'm contradicting. We have all these people who said that, but I don't see that in my data, and I want to offer some kind of conceptualizations to explain why, in this case, you would find different kind of findings, right? So there are different ways for me to use this prior research to make my argument. But to do that, I had to identify the conversation. I had to read and understand each of the papers, and I had to understand the conversation itself. And now I can position myself. And this is why this is the third kind of reading. Only now do I have enough understanding of the conversation and prior research to be able to really position myself within the conversation. So we identify the relevant kind of work. We read vertically, horizontally, and for relevance. And now we can try to position ourselves. So let me give you an example from one of my studies, just to show you concretely what it means, or what it meant for me when I did that. And this is a paper that I published together with my former Ph.D. student, Tammar in organization studies. Actually, this paper is based on her MBA kind of thesis that she wrote. It was so good that we eventually wrote a paper out of it. She is now writing a different paper out of her PhD. So what we did here, actually, she served as a research assistant in my study. So I finished my PhD, which was about the Rape Crisis Center. Then I went for a sabbatical postdoc in Berkeley, in California, came back to the Hebrew University, was offered a tenure track position in a business school. My PhD was in psychology, in the Department of Psychology. So I was really very happy that I got this tenure track position in the business school. But then I became also very anxious because I didn't study business. I came from psychology, so I didn't really know. And I was afraid that I would have some communication problems with business students. So I started reading all the business press and stuff like that, trying to get to know this. I'm interested in organizations, not so much in organizing, not so much in business. So as it happened, it was early 2000 when the high-tech, the global high-tech industry and the Israeli high-tech industry as part of that got to what we call now the bubble. So it was really developing very, very quickly, and then it just collapsed. And exactly when it collapsed, I joined the business school. So it was really a very good time for me. I wasn't in any way invested in the industry. So, it was just like for me doing qualitative research, kind of anthropological kind of research, was very interesting to see what was going on and how people understood what was going on. And then I thought maybe I should find an organization. My PhD was in organizational ethnography. So I was in the Rape Crisis Center for a long time. So I thought, I have to find a high-tech kind of organization that will be willing to allow me to study it. And people told me that in Israel, you have like 3 main conferences, annual conferences every year, when the entire industry comes together, and maybe I should go to these conferences and get to know people, and then I'll find an organization that will be willing to grant me access. So we decided to go. The first conference was in September 6, 2001. This is 5 days before the world is going to change. I live in Jerusalem. We went down, we drove down to Tel Aviv. The conference was in Tel Aviv, on the beach, on this beautiful, luxurious hotel. And we came early because we wanted to beat the traffic. And we thought that we will get in, we'll register. We is me and my research assistant, and we'll go out and have something to eat. Little did we know that as soon as we get into the conference space, there will be no reason and no motivation to get out, because it was so luxurious, with so much food and so many interesting things to see and to. So we just stayed there for the entire day. And this looks very, very different than any academic conference. Those of you who have been at academic conference know that, right? No food, hardly no water in academic conferences. There was everything. And especially what we were really, really excited about was that as we registered, we got this beautiful, I don't know whether the picture is good enough. This beautiful semi-leather laptop kind of, bag full of all kinds of goodies and freebies. So me and my research assistant, we were really excited about that. But the funny thing was that within an hour or two, we understood that we are the only one excited about the bag. And all the other people in the conference didn't really care about the bag. And people started to leave the bag, beneath the tables and stuff like that, but they didn't even collect it. So the first thing that we did is we started to collect other bags and put them in my car. And I have a very nice collection of bags, of course, only for research purposes. But then I realized, well, maybe if, the conferences are so fun and so much food and so much freebies, and maybe I should actually study the conferences themselves. It wasn't that good because it was downhill from there. Next year's, the bags got smaller and smaller and less freebies and stuff. So, but anyway, I was stuck with this research project. So I kept on going and collecting data in the conferences themselves. And actually, it kind of been a very kind of a good project. Many different papers came out of it. And what I'm telling you now is about this paper from 2020 when we published. I still have one last paper out of this project that I hope to be publishing eventually. And that would be the end of this project, data that I collected 20 years ago. I also wrote a few methodological papers out of this because the idea of studying conferences and how we can understand conferences was kind of new back then. So this is the paper that I wrote together with Tammar, who was my research assistant the year after. And it's about power dynamics in field level events, a narrative approach. So by then there was also already there the conceptualization that these kind of conferences may be field configuring events. So the entire field, like industry, all these organizations come together and negotiate some kind of understanding of who we are and what we are doing. And these kind of gatherings may influence the way the field further develops. So when we started writing this, it's actually started from the phenomenon itself, because Tammar was there, my co-author was there, both of us are called Tammar. She was there as a research assistant. She went to the biotechnology. So within the same conference, we had a high-tech and biotech kind of different kind of sessions. She went to all the biotech sessions in 2005, 2006, collected the data. And when we spoke about the experience after the conference was done, she said she was really surprised that she sat with all these people, and all the people around her were PhDs, people that have PhD in chemistry or physics or medicine, something like, right? Because these are biotech kind of entrepreneurs. They come with a lot of scholarly knowledge, scientific knowledge, but she felt like they were very insecure. They didn't know that they have something interesting. She felt like there was this power relations between the business people and the entrepreneurs that she couldn't understand. So this was really where how the paper came about, through this kind of insight that she felt. So we thought we are writing a paper about field configuring events. So we use this field configuring event as our keyword. We try in Web of Science, we try to find all the papers that already discussed field configuring events. And you see here, this is our table, right? The title, what is the definition of field configuring event? What is really the theoretical gap these papers claim that they are trying to close? What is the methodology? What is the contribution? And you already see the last column, but this is not the first reading, right? So we try to understand what's going on in this discussion, and now we can position our own work within it. So what we thought we found is a specific trend within this literature, that early on they focused on one thing, like the kind of the macro level kind of influence of field configuring events. Later we are not convinced that field configuring events really do configure the field. So now they move to different kinds of questions about what is actually happening in these conferences. So this was like the second kind of wave of studies. And the most recent studies at the time that we wrote the paper was how exactly it happens, like how they do that. Like, we understand the impact, we understand what's going on within conferences, but how is that done? So we thought this is a good positioning for us, that we have the kind of micro level kind of data, and we can explain how it happens. Okay, and we use narrative. I will not get into that methodologically. So we send the paper in, right? And we get it back with review. And they say, okay, like, we like the idea, but you still have a lot to work on, and we'll give you an R&R, like major revisions, right? And like the review team, they picked up and they said, you know what, the most interesting thing that we see in your data is really about power. And we didn't conceptualize power at all. So maybe you can really focus on power now, not just like the entire conversation around field configuring events, but issues of power. Okay, so this means now that we have to go back and read the entire conversation and find out what we can know about power. So that's what we did. So we have a new set of tables, reading 3 kinds of readings again. And what we thought we found is that people do not really care about power. So we have all these prior research, but people did not attend to power. So we make this kind of bold kind of claim. Previous research did not attend to power, and now we come to solve humanity and relate to power, right? These kind of bold statements are usually not very happily received by readers. So of course, this is what we got back, and this is the second kind of round, and they say, sorry, we don't buy it. We think prior research did attend to power. So please be more nuanced in the way you position yourself. This is a too bold kind of statement to make. So now we have to go and read the literature a third time. And we kind of felt like our bold statement was right. But how can we convince the readers? So we have to read it again and try to figure out why they feel that prior research did attend to power and we feel differently. So we go back, and what we did now, we added this kind of column. This is the fourth column from the left, right? Whether or not these papers about field configuring events actually use power or politics in the paper. So we actually just looked for these 2 words just to see whether people do mention that. And then another column that we added was, okay, maybe they relate to power, but do they conceptualize power? So do they really try to understand how power affects what's going on within field configuring events, right? So this is 2 new columns that we added because of the kind of criticism that we encounter with the reviewers. And what we found, and this was great, is that many published papers do mention power and do mention politics, but none of them actually conceptualize it. So now we have a good answer to our reviewers saying, okay, thank you for your comments. Now that we reread the literature through your comments, we see that indeed many prior studies did relate to power, but what we're still missing there, that they're not conceptualizing it. So here's our contribution. This is our positioning. We are following them in focusing on power, but we are complementing them by actually conceptualizing how power is working. And to do that, we actually also needed to have some kind of conceptualization of power. So what we did, we built on Luke's 3 phases of power. This is a known conceptualization in the social sciences more generally, and it helped us explain what was going on in the conferences that we studied. So now we do have a very nuanced understanding of the literature, and we can position ourselves in a way that our readers would agree with and will be more accurate to the conversation. And indeed, once we did that, then the reviewers were very happy with the conceptual kind of positioning of the paper. And now they had a little more kind of all kinds of smaller kind of concerns that we could attend, but we didn't need to go and read the literature a 4th time. So it ended here in terms of understanding the literature and being able to position ourselves within the literature. And then this was really fun. We submitted the 4th and final version on January 20, and the senior editor was so kind and she accepted on the same day. So that was really very quick satisfaction, and the paper was eventually published. So this is my example of a way that the reviewers pushed us to really understand the literature deeper. So I think it was also for us very educational. Like we really saw that they were right, and giving the different kinds of readings that we've made and going deeper and deeper into the papers, we were eventually able to position ourselves in a convincing way. So leaving the example now and going back to the main issues, and I have, I think, maybe 2 more slides, and then I'll open it for comments and questions. Review the literature to identify what you need to read. This is really, a crucial step, because if you're not reading the right stuff, it will not help you. Then read what you need to really read from beginning to end. Read 3 types of readings: vertical, horizontal, and for relevance. And then you would be able to try to be more accurate in the way you join the conversation, which means you position yourself within the conversation. Do that for the theoretical conversation, and you may need to do that for the methodological conversation. If you're using some kind of new or innovative kind of method, maybe you will need to do that for that as well. If you're just using a method that is very well accepted already, maybe you don't have to do that. And do that also for the empirical conversation. So make sure that you understand how you join the conversation on a theoretical level, on a methodological level, and on an empirical level, and then use all of these to understand the uniqueness of your study and what you can contribute to the conversation. Now, the last issue that I want to say is that you also need to know your data, right? It's not enough that you do just like that and you understand the conversation very well, but you also have some kind of affordances that your data allows you. So you maybe it's good to do it a few times along the way. Maybe it's good to do it when you start your project, and then you can think about what kind of data do I need, given the kinds of data that other people already had in their studies, that will help you design your research design, right? So this is not, I presented it here if the theory stands for itself, but it's not true. You have to then make sure that you are collecting the right kind of data that will allow you to say what you want to say and position yourself theoretically in the way you want to be positioned and make the contribution that you want to make. So this is why it's not only theoretical, it's also methodological and empirical, to make sure that there is coherence across all these positions that you are taking in terms of theory, methodology, and the empirical data that you have. I also want just to note, I don't know, the recording would be available later on. So there is already some work, very nice work done and published about how to position yourself. So if you're still struggling with these ideas, I'm focusing only on the reading and how to understand the conversation. This work by Locke and Carol Golden-Beaton, it's from many years ago, but it's still very, very relevant to understand how different ways to position yourself within the conversation. There is this work also about positioning, a different kind of work Alveston and Sandberg doing these two papers. That also, if you're struggling with these issues, worth reading. And also there is a lot of reading, a lot of literature about how to identify the literature, right? And how to really do this kind of literature review. So again, if this is something that you are bothered by, this is some of the readings that I will recommend for you to think about it, because each of the stages of doing research and writing is already well covered in our discipline in terms of all kind of ideas and best practices. So use them. There's no need for you to invent everything from the beginning. You can use and build on prior work. And finally, and this is my last slide, we do all that because we want to move, as Eric here said, we want to move from meaning to significance. So you can understand the meaning of this paper or that paper. What is the significance of other papers to your work? This is really what you are trying to figure out. And so in order to move from meaning to significance, you need to move from this, or one way to do it would be to move from vertical to horizontal to reading for relevance. And this would mean moving from describing the literature, like, this is like, this paper does that, and this paper that's a description, into analysis. What you really do there is you are analyzing prior research. And you're not just, this will allow you not just to represent what other people do, but actually use prior research in service of your argument. And in terms of how you write it, this would look like, this is the difference moving between X said that and Y said that, to moving to, here is my argument, and moving prior research into the parentheses, right? So instead of saying like a list of what other people did, now what you can say, why early scholars did that, a few examples of early scholars, more recent work is doing that, and now a few examples of that. So when you move from meaning to significance in terms of how it will look on the page, it will not be kind of list of what this paper, that paper, and what they said, but some kind of argument about the literature, moving the names, like the references, into parentheses. And that's kind of a good way to think about how you move from meaning to significance. This is the meaning of what they did, but this is the significance of what they did to my argument, which allows you to position yourself in the literature and hopefully make a theoretical contribution. By that, I end and I open the stage. I'll stop sharing so we can see each other, and I'm happy to answer or discuss any of. Okay.
First of all, thank you for this presentation. It really adds too much in our knowledge. Okay, I have a question. What's the difference between synthesized coherence and progressive coherence?
So that's what I'm saying. I'm not getting into that. You have a full paper that will explain that to you.
All right.
But okay. Generally, whether you are just trying to connect different things that were different together, or you're trying to show some kind of a progression of the discussion, and then you are progressing the discussion as well.
Tammar, you were mentioning, Tammar, you were mentioning previous data that you collected even a few years back. I have a situation whereby a student finished a PhD about 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, and it's institutional work and institutional entrepreneurship in Indonesia. And I was wondering, how do we need to update that data, or how do you work with data that is, I feel that there's lots of theoretical contribution there, but the data is snapshot, but for a PhD, how the data is, yeah?
Right. So, my take on it very generally is that usually I try to understand what are the characteristics of the data that I have. And instead of thinking about it as a limitation of my research, how can I think about it as an advantage of my research? So you have data from 4 or 5 years ago. How can you use this data in a way that would be an advantage? Maybe you have this retrospective kind of understanding now of something that you could not understand when you collected the data. And so you can say, by now we understand the entire process because 5 or 6 years have gone. And then it's still very important to zoom in vivo kind of data to understand something that we cannot understand retrospectively, right? So that would be this is like all data, but it's good because now I can use it in a way. So think about the data in that sense. How can you convince the readers that this data is exactly the ideal data for what you want to do? And of course, it depends on what you're doing with it. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. I would like to talk to you more about it, and I already put my email in the chat box, so you'll hear from me more. Okay. I don't want to hog the thing now.
Okay, but you email me,
yeah,
because I don't see the if you want to email me, find me.
Yeah, I shall email you,
Okay.
and we shall have a conversation. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. But I thought my question would be relevant to others as well.
Okay. Ibrat, are you deciding who's talking, or?
Yeah, we just call out, so people will raise their virtual hands and we just call out in the order of appearance. So I think Visa is the first one.
Thanks, Ibrat. And Professor Tammar, thank you for that masterclass. Truly, it was a very, very helpful one, especially for early stage doctoral students like me in strategy. So I do have a question regarding, with respect to the example that you showed, and you were talking about the Luke's 3 phases of power, which you ended up using eventually, right, to position your argument. Did you actually come across that particular concept with respect to field configuring events literature? Or was it something that you had to identify later on? So in the sense that, was it part of the initial set of literature that you had looked at? Or, I mean, how did you arrive at that concept?
Yeah, that's a great question. So sometimes if we want to add new layer of understanding about a phenomenon that was already already written about, we need to borrow from other theories. So if I'm saying field configure events did not conceptualize power, so I couldn't find any conceptualization of power within this literature, that I have to venture to other literature to have insights. So that's what we did. We looked a little bit about there's a lot of stuff going on about power, right? And we looked for something that will be relevant to what we are doing, that we can use, that will not be too complex, right? We didn't want to get into that literature because it's so huge. And then we knew about it. I don't remember who, but one of us knew about this concept. So we went and checked, but we also checked other concepts. And then eventually we decided to use this one because we could see how we can use it and how it will help us map very nicely different kinds of phases of power. So sometimes when you want to renew something within a specific theory, you have to venture out. You may ask some people, maybe, if you know some experts in this field, you can ask them, what can I use? You can read a little bit, and then you decide what you are using.
Thank you. I just have one follow-on question as well. Sorry to keep the others waiting. In terms of, so I am interested in doing qualitative research and case studies, but a lot of times what happens is the initial research question that you started off with, and maybe you need or some phenomenon that you saw. And when you are kind of looking for literature based on that, and you're kind of looking for the initial, your library, so to speak. And a lot of times it happens that probably after the first iteration, you realize that there is a more interesting thing that is happening from what you had thought initially, right? So it's an iterative process somewhere. Right. So in that case, do you actually build upon the initial literature review database itself, or rather, I mean, have you had cases where you had to kind of, go into other literature as well, and was it too complex?
So here's the thing, getting to know a literature conversation, as we spoke now, it takes a few weeks, if not months, right, to read everything and to understand everything. So it's a huge kind of commitment and effort. And then so you don't want to do it too often because it's it takes a lot of time. And once you understand a literature really deeply, then maybe you want to keep on using it because then you can already build on your expertise. And the third reason to stick with the same literature would be that each literature is also a community, right? So when I decide which literatures I use, it's also kind of identity kind of decision. This is the kind of scholar I want to be. These are the people that I want to converse with. These are the conferences that I go to. These are the places where I will publish. So this conversation is not just abstract kind of intellectual conversation. It's also real people meeting, conversing, stuff like that. So on the one hand, you would want to stick with the same conversation. On the other hand, in qualitative research, it really is the case that maybe something is more interesting there that you want to go. And actually, it's very convincing. If you say, I started the study with, I didn't think about politics at all and power relations. And eventually the data, drove me there. This is very convincing. That is really, it's really central in the data. So I think you have to balance that. I think you have to find a way, maybe initially not to put a full year into reading, but just do some kind of reading, then go to the data. Then when you are more assured that this is the literature, then you go back and you read it more carefully and stuff like that, just to make sure that you are not. I know from my own PhD students, sometimes reading is easier. I mean, always reading is easier than writing, right? So I have this PhD student just read and read, and they feel like they don't know enough yet, and they have to read more and read more and read more. Eventually, I have to tell them, this is just you're just avoiding the anxiety of writing. So please, no more reading. Now you have to start writing. So we have to balance all these different kinds of considerations.
But you're saying that it's always possible that you have an iterative, that table keeps, there are multiple iterations of that table.
Of course, you can keep reading forever. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Rhea?
Yes, thank you so much. Maybe jumping directly on that topic, actually, of the time that it takes to get familiar in that depth. My first question in that regard would be just as to get some orientation. How much time do you take? I mean, you have a lot of experience, so you will be faster, but what would be your recommendation as an aim? Aim for how many hours, and how many hours should I be done with this one first deep reading? Because I tend to spend so much time on this, so that in the end I'm never able to read 1,200 articles in within a year or so. So that's the first part. And the second part, based on this, do you have recommendations on how to kind of maybe slice or compartmentalize this reading? Also, when you mentioned the snowballing from the relevant articles, also from the pivoting and so on, if you can give some practical advice there, how to manage that.
Well, it's really, it's not like I don't want to answer your first question, but I really don't know to tell you how much time it takes.
Of course.
I do try to be very patient with myself at this stage, right? To take the time, because I know that it will eventually pay off. It always pays off. I can tell you that from my other hat as a reviewer and as an editor. When I read a paper, it's kind of very easy to see whether the person actually knows the literature or not. And this is like fundamental to the question whether this paper will get an R&R or will be rejected. So I think it's always pays off to put the time to actually understand the conversation. Now, mind you that if you do it once and then you stay within the same conversation, you don't have to read everything from the beginning. So this is also something that you do. Like I can tell you, when I went to a postdoc in the University of California in Berkeley, and then I decided to write this paper that eventually was my first paper. And I didn't use institutional theory in my thesis, in my PhD thesis, but then I realized that I want to use it. And I actually spent the entire year reading the conversation. So you can say you wasted your entire postdoc year on reading, but I feel like this really paid off eventually for me for my entire career, because now I'm writing within institutional theory and I really know it because I read everything from the beginning, and now I'm just updating my understanding. So I think, think about it not as a waste of time, but actually investment in your future, in your intellectual future, that you will be able to use all this knowledge later on, in not only in this thesis, but in other papers, of course, if you're staying within academia. So I think it pays off. Probably it will take, I don't know, any time from 1 hour to 3-4 hours to understand one paper, to be able to understand it enough to be able to put it into the table. So I think maybe it probably took me longer when I started. The second issue was how to manage all that. So, okay, you have to use some kind of a software, to just to document everything so you won't get lost. So I would say use some kind of, Zotero or one of the others that really helps you manage kind of bibliography and references list.
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of kind of you start with the sample that you identified first, and then as soon as I read one paper, of course, there comes another sample part that adds on top of it. And
so just add them.
Yeah.
And usually what I try to do, I try to read it temporally. So start in the beginning and move on, because that way, eventually I will have a feeling of how the conversation progressed through time, which is oftentimes a very nice way to present the conversation, right? To say early on, later on, stuff like that.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Norma?
Hello. I think you almost touched into my question already. So I've been taught the same thing that you said, to say go on Excel, read so many papers. It'll take you roughly an hour to 3 hours, look at the citations in terms of the searches and why haven't they been cited, if it's really interesting, the rating of the journal, etc., etc. But I find that it takes so long. I don't know if I'm lazy or I'm a popcorn baby, microwavable popcorn baby, because I'm trying to figure out if there is a software that I could utilize, because I'm in HR, but I'm also in psychology. So I'm looking at women's career development, and you have to read so much because it all links in together. For example, self-undermine, it will go into SDT, for example, and then you have to look at organizational citizenship behaviors, etc., etc. So how can I, because my days are long and I'm trying to make them a bit healthier,
of course,
essentially. So is there any tips?
Well, as I said, I'm old school, so I would read everything myself, and I'll put it down myself. I don't know that there is any software right now, not even AI with all the promises, that can actually read the paper for you and understanding this kind of deep level. So if this concept is not central to your paper, maybe you can read a little less. You're reading, but if these are the main concepts that they're using and that you probably will use further on in other papers, then I would say put the time into it. If you think you are saving time now, it will cost you later, because the paper would be rejected and you will have to rewrite it or whatever. So you want, okay, maybe I should zoom out for a minute and say that, like, my thinking is this. As an editor, we get 1,200 papers a year in organization studies. Some 70% of these papers would be desk rejected, which means that they are not even going into the review process. This is the kind of a decision that me and my co-editor-in-chief, Paolo Catrone, are doing. And what you want is to send in a paper that will pass this first, and this is the same in all kind of highly ranked kind of journals, right? So your paper has to be good enough to get into the review process, and that the team would be able to work with you and help you develop the paper. And for that, there's no way around it. You have to put the work into it, so it will be good enough. And when I read it, I can feel that you did the work, you know the conversation, even if I'm not fully on board with your kind of positioning, but I see that you understand the conversation. Like, your literature review is really mature. It really reflects your understanding. And then we will be willing to work with you. Otherwise, it will be rejected. So you saved a few days here, but then you have a paper that was rejected. So in that sense, like, if you think about our career in a more kind of macro way, along years, this will pay off. Don't worry, it will pay off for you to actually read all the papers and really understand the conversation that you are going to be an expert in. I'm not aware of any software that can do that for you right now. I mean, this is really human brain.
Thank you very much. No,
that's my take. I mean, maybe you have different kind of conditions. I do understand, and I do remember that how stressful it is in the early days, and still stressful these days for me as well. So I do understand the time constraint. I'm just feeling like it was never a waste of time. It always paid off for me.
No, thank you very much. It has paid off because I feel like I'm more confident in terms of my articulation.
Exactly. So when people read your text, they feel that. That's the thing. That it comes across in your writing, and then it's more convincing for the readers as well. And we are in the business of convincing, right? We have to convince our readers that what we are saying is valid. So you have to have it.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure.
Could you allow me?
Yes, hi, it's Guillaume. Thank you very much, Tammar, for a great presentation, very insightful. When you gave the example of the article with Tammar Gross, I was surprised at how benevolent the reviewers' comments were, because that's not always been my experience in journals. I've seen comments by reviewers and editors alike that showed little actual reading of my paper, like criticisms that showed the paper or had not been read, or perhaps not understood, and that would be my fault. So in any case, and I guess my question was, how do you get through that first round? And to an extent, you've already answered the question in your last response, but so do the work, do your homework, show the editor and reviewers that you know your topic. Do you have anything else to add to that, to sort of enter a collaboration relationship with the reviewers and editor?
Right. I think it's a great question. First of all, I'm sorry that you have some bad experiences. I hope not with organization studies, but I think, we're doing a lot of effort trying to be developmental, but of course, whenever we reject the paper, people are really upset. So I would say this, like, I can share with you, like, when I read a paper, and I read probably 20 papers a week coming in, what I'm looking for is really the potential. So we know, based on prior research, actually, that papers never are accepted on the first round, right? You submit a paper, it will never be accepted as is. And that papers really do change a lot, especially in terms of, I'm talking now about qualitative research, in terms of the conceptualization. So papers will change, I know that. So what I'm looking for is the potential. Two ways potential. One of them is the data. I read your methodological section very carefully, because I want to see that you have rich enough data, that you have the right kind of data for the question that you are asking. And if I feel like the data is not there, like it's not rich enough, or it's not the right kind of data, then there's no point in sending the paper out for review, right? So this will be a reason for rejection. So one potential that I look for is the data. And the second potential is really you, the author. Now, I don't know you. Like, maybe as an editor, I may see your name, but I don't know most of the people that I, handle their papers. So what I'm looking for really is your voice in the text. So I'm looking to see how mature you are in your thinking, how well you know the different choices that you've made, whether you understand that you've made a choice and you can explain and justify the choice. And by choice, I mean, why do you work within this theory and not another theory? Why did you choose this case and not another case? So I'm really looking for your voice, your authority as a researcher. And this gives me like kind of a clue that we can create this collaboration over the review process, and maybe it will be fruitful. So this is really what I'm looking for. And I'm looking for that in the literature review. I'm looking for that in the way you present the methodology. I'm looking for that in the way you present your findings and in the discussion, even though I know some of it will change dramatically. But I'm looking to see that it's good enough. It doesn't have to be ideal. It's never ideal. The papers that I'm sending for review, I mean, my own papers they're not ideal when they're not perfect when I send them in. I try for them to be good enough to pass this first kind of. And then in the review process, what we look for is that you got all these input from all these reviewers, really 3 people and an editor put a lot of time into reading and understanding what you're trying to do and give you feedback. And now the question is how you use it. So in the second, like in the round where you revise and now you resubmit, what we're really looking to see is that you are willing to work with us. You're not just saying, they didn't understand, it's their problem. You understand that if we didn't understand, it's your problem, because you have to make it more clear, right? If you want us to understand what we are doing. And then you are willing to work and use our feedback to really improve your paper. So in the first round, I'm looking for your voice and the data. In the second round, I'm looking for the delta, like how much this paper has improved. And I'm also looking to see that we have this cooperation here. Usually it will go through 2 cycles of major revisions. And then, but if you're not willing to do the work and we see that you didn't really change a lot, it will be rejected. So we're really looking for that, and we don't have a lot of time. We try to make, at least in organization studies, we try to make like a real decision by the 2nd round, right? Not to, because if we send you to a 3rd round and a 4th round, it's getting more and more frustrating to reject for you if we reject the paper. So we try after 2 rounds to either we can see that the paper will get there. Maybe it's not there yet, but it will get there because the author is working with us and we have a strong team and we will make it eventually, all of us, and publish it. Or, no, it will not go. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you for such a gracious answer and so detailed, and also going into the writing process, but also the reviewing process from the inside. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Noreen?
Thank you, Brett. Hi, Tammar. I'm working on human resource management, and my question is, I'm wondering about your advice in terms of how to contribute theoretically to a certain, let's say, phenomenon that is in itself conceptualized in many ways in such a way that there's no particular agreement really about that, let's say, concept. For example, about human resource management systems, like the literature says that there are different components, and HRM systems have many words or related phrases used to denote similar ideas. So in that case, how do you think should one contribute theoretically? Like, I'm afraid.
What my thinking is, what we're talking about is really a conversation that has many different threads, right? And then you have to choose. Again, you cannot just account for everything, and you need to have like a clear understanding of who your audience is. So if you understand the conversation and you understand that there are 5, 6 different strands, then you can decide, I'm focusing here. I think this is where I want to make my contribution. This is where my data speaks to, or whatever. I'm sticking with that. And then you chart, like, this is where I'm like, you help the readers to understand that you start with this big conversation and then you focus on this strand because of these reasons, and here's what you want to contribute. Otherwise, it's too big. You cannot speak to the entire terrain, right? You have to limit it in some way. But in order to be able to do that, you need to understand the entire terrain.
All right, great. So somehow that's related to your previous response to the other audience regarding justifying, and this time around.
Exactly. You have to make choices, and you have to be aware that you made these choices, and you have to justify these choices.
Great, thanks a lot, Tammar.
Sure.
Great.
Ibrat, I think we are almost done, and I cannot stay longer. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So just maybe one quick last question, Jale, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have a question about emergent topic and also emergent field, because I'm recently learning about impact investing, but I also get to know that it's actually pretty new topic and also field. So at the beginning, I was thinking about I should do a case study, but then I realized that, okay, there's not so much literature I could use. Then I started to wonder whether I should do a conceptual paper. So how do you usually decide whether we should do a conceptual paper or a case study and empirical paper? And thank you very much for this session. Thank you so much.
Sure. So, well, one thing I would say that I think by now impact investing is not that new, and actually there are a lot of studies around impact investing. So maybe you should like run a wider kind of search to find all of these. But if something is emerging, like it's a new phenomena, the question is how similar and different this phenomena is to what is already out there. So for example, I'm not an expert on impact investing, but if impact investing is really new, then maybe you can start from investing more generally, not impact investing, and then to see how similar and different it is, and then how you can position yourself vis-a-vis the bigger kind of conversation, right? So first check if it's really a new conversation, because I think by now, at least 10 years, it's already out there. And I read a lot about that. But then also, if it's really new, then think how you can start from another conversation and then move there. Okay, maybe you can relate to all kinds of other kinds of impact and then move to impact investing. Or maybe you can think about investing more generally and then narrow down to impact investing. But you have to understand the kind of the larger kind of conversation and then how you can focus on it right now.